something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Before the main discussion today, I want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers for their support. If it weren't for all of you, we would not be able to do this. If you are not a subscriber, you are missing out on hundreds of hours of content which illuminate the organized criminal entity that is the U.S. empire. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Bryce, Greene, it's great to be back with you here at the end of all things, maybe, who knows, but anyway, it's great to be back with you.
Yeah, if we're not at the end of all things, we're at least looking at that direction right now, but yeah, it's good to be back.
Absolutely, and let's get right into it and talk about some things related to nuclear implications that have dominated the headlines recently. So here is from Twitter, Dmitry Medvedev with the tweet that launched not 1,000 ships, but a couple of submarines, perhaps. So this is the tweet in question. He's a former president of Russia, and he was previously understood to be the guy who was more sympathetic to liberals in America and the U.S. and wanting to be friendly with the U.S. Now he is kind of this agitprop almost guy. For Russia, out there on Telegram and Twitter. He says like Trump's playing the ultimate. I know, he's like the hatchet man, but in a way that's pretty entertaining, as long as it doesn't get us killed. Trump's playing the ultimate game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things, okay? So he's talking about Trump's playing the ultimatum game, is what I mean to say. Trump issuing ultimatums saying, Russia better cut this out, people are dying, and all that. Okay.
Yeah, and giving them like, just like he did with Iran, like giving them 60 days and then giving them 50 days and then
attacking them before, attacking them, sneak attack. But he says Russia isn't Israel or even Iran, and each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. And I think elsewhere he's mentioned the dead hand, part of the Russian nuclear deterrence system, which is set up so that if there's ever a first strike attack on Russia or back then the Soviet Union, there would be an automated retaliatory response. And the idea being, I mean, it's basically like the Doomsday Machine. It's exactly like the Doomsday Machine in Dr. Strangelove. And the reason for having such a machine is that you would make it clear that there's no incentive to attack and launch a first strike. So in the case of the Soviet version, and compared to the fictional Dr. Strangelove version, the Soviets and the Russians have essentially let the U.S. know that this is something that exists, so that only a lunatic would want to attack Russia, right? But apparently we are ruled by lunatics.
Yeah.
So this is amazing that this tweet provoked Trump to say this is very serious stuff. We're ramping up our alertness, and we're sending in 2 submarines to get closer. I mean, this is madness. So, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, the response to the submarine was also good. It was like, yeah, I think he said that, well, we don't care about your submarines. They won't matter. Our defenses can handle that now. Like, and I think that's actually true. But I think this ramp up between Trump and anyone in Russia, it's kind of part and parcel of this myth that Trump was really going to make serious change on Ukraine. Because, he ran saying, Joe Biden's policy, that's what Medvedev is referencing here. Don't be Sleepy Joe. And Trump ran on a policy like, oh, I'm going to make peace with Ukraine. I'm gonna be the ones to strike a deal and end the killing, end the fighting, which was popular with the American people.
24 hours. I'll do it in 24 hours.
24 hours. And then he didn't do it. And it wasn't hard to do it, right? Like, this conflict for the last decade has had a very clear solution. And it's been obvious. It's some form of autonomy for the eastern Donbass regions. Crimea, they, in accord with the referenda, joins Russia, and Ukraine remains neutral. Like, those are
those oblasts in the east, which are majority Russian, Russian speakers, and so on.
Well, this was like the Minsk Accords. There was some form of autonomy for those groups.
Well, the deal has changed, though.
Since the war started, that's really not on the table anymore. That's a territory that has been partially occupied by Russia and is slowly, almost fully occupied. And Russia is no longer saying, Ukraine, you can get these back. They're saying that these will be part of Russia or they'll be independent.
Kiev and Odessa are still potentially in play if Ukraine and the U.S. are not so stupid as to let this war go to the bitter end, which could very well, I think, result in Russia taking Kiev, which is the birthplace of the Russian nation. Yeah, and Odessa is also a Russian city historically, so it would be in Russia's interest to do this rather than to just allow some Ukrainian state to have that. I think there may be if they continue, there may be no Ukraine rump state. It may be absorbed by Poland, and who knows how they'll deal with it.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I can't imagine that Russia would have an appetite for fully occupying, Western Ukraine. Because
they wouldn't. They wouldn't do that.
Because this was what the Western powers wanted to begin with. When there was all this talk about they would fall in 3 days, and then the plan very clearly appeared to be that the U.S. would be funding stay-behind units, and that's what they were training, and that's what the NATO and MI6 and CIA training was for. And then when Putin did not fully commit to fully taking over Ukraine and carpet bombing it, doing what we did to Iraq, well, that kind of stumped the West. And then they were scrambling about what to do about it. And that's how we got this war that we're having now. And Putin has been playing this relatively,
rationally.
Rationally and pretty, not timidly, but non-aggressively. Like, he's not, blowing up Kiev, which, he could do with a few Rezniks.
You can compare Gaza to Kiev.
Yeah, compare Gaza to Kiev. Compare like shock and awe.
They have Rezniks that could take out as much of Ukraine as they wanted without nuclear weapons, and they are not interceptable. Kiev has not been destroyed for the sole reason that that Putin, Russia, have not decided to destroy Ukraine, and they don't need nukes to do it.
Right, and
destroy Kiev specifically.
And getting back to Trump's policy, the reason that Trump is not, going to the negotiation table in a serious way, there were some early overtures where he was like, come to the table and maybe we could talk about stuff and things, but I'm not committing to anything. And Putin was like, no, the solution has been on the table, and if you're not going to be serious, then we're not going to really talk. But the reason is because the policy has been the same since, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2.
Obama was a little bit better. It was a little better because he said, I don't want to send them these weapons because we don't want to get into a war with Russia. But he left it there. He placated the neocons enough to leave it there for the next person.
Right, but it was under Obama that the original crisis started in 2014.
Oh yeah. He had to have given the green light to the Maidan coup.
Yeah, exactly. Or I would believe that he probably didn't even know about it, but was about the full extent of the coup. But he was like, our people are there. Vicky's down there supporting democracy, and
Sleepy Joe is really active on this issue. But I think because Joe was so active and Newland was down there, that was policy. I have to believe that Obama. I think Obama did this just like he did the Timber Sycamore in Syria. He thinks that he has to. He cannot just blow off the Zionist neocon faction. One of his earlier big backers in Chicago is a descendant of the extremely mobbed up Crown family, Krenskys, right? Originally, Henry Crown, huge mob guy, figures in the JFK assassination story and so on. And this was one of Obama's backers from Chicago and his Rahm Emanuel connection. So Obama, I think, was doing what U.S. presidents have to do now, which is please the sort of corporate American side, the remnants and the sort of few descendants of the Rockefeller type American corporate power, and then the neocons. And so he tries to please both of them. And so he has these half measure policies where he does the Maidan coup, but he doesn't give them all the weapons. He spends all this money on Syria, but then he doesn't go in. He says, the intelligence isn't a slam dunk. So it's like he's trying to give them a little. I think George H.W. Bush did a similar thing with the first Gulf War, because after the fact, there were people like Cheney and others were like, why didn't we go all the way to Baghdad? But I think Bush was trying to, but H.W. Bush, just like when he ran Plan Team B in the CIA, he was trying to balance those sides of the U.S. equation where you have some reference to the U.S. national interest, but you will give the neocons something significant because they're so powerful.
Right. And the neocons, in the Trump administration, they were pretty clear about what their plan was. I mean, like, you look at America First. I mean, America First, the actual policy, the think tank that they created called America First, their policy is just like, it looks like the same shit from the Center for New American Security or like Brookings or Heritage Foundation. Like, it's not dramatically different. And Trump made it clear towards the end of the campaign, well, before his victory, that any rapprochement with Russia was about expanding American primacy so that they could first go after China, so they could split up Russia and China, and divide and conquer. And when when Trump got into office, Pete Hegseth was very clear to his European counterparts that the goal would be to expand the war, but to offload a lot of that directly from America and onto the European partners. This is the impetus behind the big push to get NATO countries to commit, 5% of their GDP, which is, insane military buildup. But it's good for America because, a part of America, because these European countries aren't going to be buying their own weapons. They don't have a big, military industrial company. Well, they do, but the majority of the things that they would be buying would come from American corporations. So it's effectively saying, yes, America will continue to supply weapons, but instead of us just gifting them to Ukraine or, loaning them or whatever financial chicanery that they're doing, we're going to have the Europeans pay us to ship weapons to Ukraine. It's really just an accounting scheme, but it is no path towards peace. And
it's doomed because there's smaller number of people who are even able to use those weapons for a few months before they get destroyed by Russian artillery or drones.
Right. And someone asked us to look at like events in Ukraine, which is a good Substack. I think that's one of the more important Ukraine Substacks. I mean, they have all these videos and these of the young people getting abducted off the street to being press ganged into their their rookie regiments that aren't trained, thrown on the front lines, quickly decimated. It's why polling for I think this is in the last few days, polling in Ukraine for a negotiated settlement, a peaceful settlement, is over 60% now. It's over 60%, and that's in stark contrast to when the war was starting. It was around 20-30%. This, of course, excluded Ukrainians in the Donbass, which it's a whole other issue. But the Ukrainian people are pretty tired of being used as cannon fodder in this, and they seem to be more rational. And the internal struggles against Zelensky are also very interesting to watch. And it looks like the West is gearing up for some sort of shift in power in Ukraine with getting Zelensky out. There was recently a huge scandal where Zelensky got a lot of crap from Western officials for reorganizing the independence of one of their big anti-corruption units, so that it was going to be placed basically directly under his control instead of being run through independently appointed or elected people. This was too much for even the West, and they don't seem to care about corruption. That much is true. They are going after Zelensky himself, which indicates that they need a change in policy, and they need a new figure to be the face of that change in policy. And Zelensky has served his time. He's going to retire to Miami if he survives, which isn't all that clear to begin with.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But the takeaway is that there does not seem to be any conceivable way to reverse the fortunes of Ukraine on the battlefield. I don't even think that the European spending into Ukraine is going to have much of a chance to get off the ground, because I think that this could very well be over by the end of the year. I don't usually want to make predictions about the time of this because they've been so methodical, but it just looks very bad for them. And this was predictable and predicted, and so it seems like this is a real mess. They should have sued for peace immediately if they were smart, but I think if they did, it would be such a loss for the U.S. and NATO that it would derail other plans it would weaken U.S. power across the board. And as cynical as it is to say, I think that the pursuit of greater Israel by the neocons, which seems to be as much as anything, they're driving the goal that animates the shift towards neoconservatism, that if Trump had settled in Ukraine and the U.S., it would have been such a clear defeat for NATO and the West that it may have been more difficult to keep support for what was going on in Gaza tenable. I'm not like it just would have been bad for the allies of Iran, meaning Russia. It would have been useful for them, Russia, Iran, China, everybody else, to have not this situation in Ukraine going on anymore, and essentially a massive victory over NATO. So I want to look at, but that's kind of that's speculative.
That's an interesting point, because then you get into this question about why is there any divide whatsoever between like the neocons, the right, the people who wrote the empire managers about Russia versus Israel. Like in Israel, unanimous support for Greater Israel Project, but in Ukraine there is a little bit more dissent. And I think that's because of a tactical disagreement about how you best go about, running the empire. Well, is it really smart is it worth extending Russia so much that you're depleting your own stockpiles of artillery? And since Russia's military has increased so much, their capacity has increased so much, is there really any point in trying to push them more that way? Because if you're looking at Israel, when they were defending against Iran, against Iran's missile attacks, they ran out of interceptors.
Yeah, they got their ass kicked in that war. This is what's become more and more clear, that they were pretty much soundly defeated in terms of what their objectives were and then what the outcome was. This was a decisive defeat for them, and I think history will show over time that this is only more so the case.
Exactly, and like all of that ammunition, all of those interceptors, that was supplied by the United States. And if the United States is bogged down supplying interceptors just for the strategic purpose of extending Russia, if you're an Israeli planner, you're like, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Maybe there's room for debate over to what extent America should be spending their money on Ukraine against Russia versus spending money on us so we can go and attack Iran.
Right.
That, I think, might explain some of the public disagreements among empire planners on that issue.
This is the time where the analysis of the U.S. deep state establishment regime, whatever you want to call it, as a sort of pluralistic entity, but the pluralist entities that determine policy are all vicious imperialist, capitalist, oligarch-backed entities. And so this project in Ukraine, it was part of the bigger neocon unipolar Project for a New American Century. But it was, as the years went on and up to the present, we realized this was insane, what they were trying to do with NATO and expansion and defeating Russia. Likewise, the Israel situation seems to be, and the Greater Israel Project, which goes back even further, really goes back to probably before Israel was even created, because these guys are such lunatics. But it's crumbling now, and I want to show you another headline that captures some of this. This is from Mondo Weiss. Leaked cabinet transcript reveals Israel chose to starve Gaza as a strategy of war. Netanyahu chose to blow up the ceasefire and starve Gaza's population in order to force a surrender from Hamas. while top military and security officials favored moving to the second phase of a ceasefire, leaked cabinet meeting minutes reveal. Hold on, you got some. Let me read that part again. Can you mute your? Okay, if that's done, let me read this again. Netanyahu chose to blow up the ceasefire and starve Gaza's population in order to force a surrender from Hamas, while top military and security officials favored moving to the second phase of a ceasefire, leaked cabinet meeting minutes reveal. So what is notable here is that there were more people among the decision makers in Israel who disagreed with Netanyahu, including high military officials and so on, that were saying, let's move forward with the ceasefire and bring it into this because this was not going to be good for Israel, that this was going to be damaging to the legitimacy and the success of the Zionist project, really. So this is, to me, notable that even these people who wouldn't mind, who would kill the Palestinians and steal all their land if it were feasible and they could get away with it, they essentially were coming to the conclusion that this wasn't a good policy. But Netanyahu, who has been the main advocate for the Israeli right-wing sort of super Nazified Zionist Lebensraum project for Greater Israel, he was for continuing going for the maximalist gains and basically wiping out the population of Gaza, including by starvation.
Yeah, and this is one of the long. You can add it to the list of the long list of headlines of things that should be very clear to people paying attention, but aren't often discussed because there's no written record for it. Now we have the written record. We've known for quite some time that Netanyahu has been the decision to either proceed with negotiations or to continue the war. It's always been continue the war. What I don't really think, because I think this was first reported in Israeli press. That was the case, right? They reported it as a Netanyahu plan to try and subdue Hamas. I don't necessarily know if that was the case. I don't think that they think that that's totally possible. What is more likely is that Netanyahu is using this war for his own political purposes. There is a faction who believes that going for broke right now is the best thing to do, and they're the faction that is keeping Netanyahu in power.
Right, that's what I'm saying. He represents this bigger project. So all of these people like Smotrich and all of these lunatics, the people that represent the settlers, this is the project. And Netanyahu has been the front man for this, the main advocate, and very active in this in many ways. Here's a passage from the article. The document purports to show that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused multiple proposals that would have secured the release of the remaining Israeli captives during the ceasefire between January and March 2025. Netanyahu decided to break the ceasefire against the advice of top Israeli military and security officials and to cut off all aid to Gaza to, quote, force Hamas to surrender, the leak shows. So, yeah, the bigger issue of what you're talking about, of this window of opportunity and Netanyahu's own political fortunes, and how that factors into it, that isn't mentioned. And the important aspects of forcing Hamas to surrender and what Hamas really means here for that is it a bit of a red herring in a way, or a MacGuffin, or however we want to say it? If the issue really is Greater Israel, they don't come out and say this specifically, but I don't think that this is necessarily the way they would even speak about it in their own terms. You still have to have the pretense of Hamas as this implacable, unique existential threat.
Yeah, and it's not clear that Israel as a society can continue this long enough or at the intensity needed to fully complete these maximalist goals. Even if there was no question of international public opinion, even if there was no declining support for Israel in the United States, it's not clear that Israel would be able to fully cleanse Gaza based on what we've seen so far. We're still seeing reports of Hamas popping up in places that Israel believes are pacified. And, once the occupation sets in, this is what Green Beret guy has been saying from the GCF, and I'm blanking on his name.
Aguilar.
Yes, Aguilar. He points out that once the occupation sets in, that's when the real counterinsurgency starts. That's when the real shit gets going. And I don't think Israel barely has the stomach to continue the war at this intensity. And if it becomes more intense, if there are more, Zio body bags coming back through Tel Aviv, they might not support that. But they certainly don't care about the humanitarian crisis, because I'm sure you've seen the new recent poll that shows that 4 out of 5 Jewish Israelis are not concerned with the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Yeah, it's a Nazified society, thanks in part to a Nazified regime that has been pursuing a Nazified political project for decades. And this is what it does to people's brains when you live under that kind of a regime. We saw it in Germany, and we see it now in Israel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you guys ever want something horrifying, just go to, what's it called? The Israel Democracy Institute. They do public polling on a lot of a wide variety of issues in Israel. It's astounding, the state of Israeli public opinion. One of the more interesting things I found is that optimism about the country had been very low before October 7th, but immediately afterwards, optimism about their country's future shot up dramatically. Like, that's kind of a sick society. As they were screaming about, we're under attack and they're trying to genocide Israel. Yeah, as if. But, that's when their optimism was the highest about their country.
They were excited that they could murder some people.
Yeah. You can go back and read all this stuff about how the lust for revenge was like a big cultural moment in the wake of October 7th. Like, people have talked about it, like, almost with the degree of euphoria, because they get to go and kill some Gazans. And that image of Israelis sitting on lawn chairs watching Gaza be bombed, I mean, that's just like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Well, you have
I'm sure you've seen all the TikToks and of like the little kids making fun of the of Arab women under the rubble, like putting
music
on Arab
videos.
face.
They had weird music videos, weird sort of Nazified music videos.
Yeah, like Death to Arab,
Destroy the Seed of Amalek and all that.
Yeah, that became one of like the top songs on like the Israel like music charts.
It's like do you remember Glenn Beck when he was like this was maybe 10 years after the fact, and he said like the 9/12 movement. Can we just recapture that special feeling that we had on September 12th? And like, if anything captures like the fascist side of the American equation, it's that you would really want to think of this as like something to get back to, the purity of 9/12, where it's just like this colonial massacre that you could point to, or this colonial, anti-colonial movement that you could say like, look at this, we must go and attack them in West Asia, So, but.
And that point, just a point on September 12th, that was, I think, the highest point of public opinion of the U.S. federal government, like the president, ever in American history. Like, the highest approval point was right after we were about to go.
The World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the two pillars of greatness, that like, it was so perfectly constructed. And the Twin Towers are like these phallic objects. So, Lance DeHaven Smith he was hilarious when he would talk about this. Because he said I don't subscribe to this because it's so far out there, and yet these people are so nuts that I can't totally write it off. Lance said that, like, think about the symbolism of what they did. You've got the two phalluses of the World Trade Center, and they're stabbed twice, like invoking fear of castration in the psyche of the American people. And then he said, and the Pentagon, like, look at the shape of the Pentagon. It's kind of like an anal orifice, and it just gets stabbed. And we know that we're under attack and they're out to get us. And I mean, so that's the psychology that we're talking about. And as clownish as it is, it's basically as clownish as look at Trump, look at Hegseth, and tell me like, that's too clownish to think that our regime would think in these sort of terms and just treat us to this kind of idiocy. But like, look who they give us to lead us, like Trump, Hegseth, who is... Like, he seems like a guy who would play a defense secretary it's some sort of parody of the United States.
Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing. So,
like
9/12, 9/12, I'm so excited.
Yeah, both of those guys are literally just reality TV guys. You know, you have the Apprentice, and then you have Hegseth's Fox News show, which is like, that's not like serious. That's not serious intellectual work going on Fox News. It's being a hype man. It's being a public face. It's being like a distraction, basically, like a figurehead for a very deeper an evil system. Like, it's the clownishness has no boundaries, but that's why they're there. They're there to be clowns. That's what gets the base pop hyped up. That's what sells the books. That's what gets the podcast listened to. And that's why tapping into this kind of backfired for them with this whole Epstein business.
We'll get into that in 1 second, but because that's the exact next thing I want to talk about. But let me just recommend that people go and watch Oliver Stone's Putin interviews and compare the demeanor, the reasoning, the logic, the argument of Vladimir Putin versus what we see from the West. We have this cartoon version of other leaders, but if you look at the public statements and then the Putin interviews themselves, the documentary of Putin, and then of Xi as well, there are actually serious leaders in the world. You could potentially have leaders who would look out for the national interest, meaning the interests of the people in the countries they lead. Like, it's the U.S. system and what we've done to the rest of the West, where that's so perverse, and where actual statesmanship is just forbidden by a regime that only cares about oligarchy and the oligarchy's pet projects for global domination. So people should check that out. But now, getting into the architecture of that and the way that this functions, I want to show this headline, which is extremely nutty. Trump team may go to Joe Rogan to fix Epstein fallout. So it says, since the Trump administration reversed course last month on its promise to release more information about the late Jeffrey Epstein, the president has struggled to get Americans to move on from the fact that he maintained a decade-long friendship with the child sex trafficker. And one of the things that they're trying to do is to reach out to Rogan and maybe enlist him to somehow act as a PR man for their efforts to get people to forget about this Epstein guy.
The ultimate useful idiot card. But like, even Joe Rogan isn't that stupid. Like,
no, he's actually shrewd in some ways compared to many commenters. I'm not preaching the gospel of him, but he will occasionally say things more true than you'll hear from people like Jacob in Democracy Now!, who are supposedly on the left and anti-imperialist.
It's kind of like an average guy thing. Like, your average guy probably has better takes on most of how the world works than most of the people running the government, even if they're like not particularly intelligent. And sometimes Joe Rogan fits that mold. I mean, for bad actors, he's pretty easy to manipulate. They'll spread bad ideas.
He's got some money people attached to him and behind him in ways that are inscrutable, but you don't get to be that big without having some modus vivendi with the powers that be.
Yeah, the things that the liberals whine about when they talk about Joe Rogan, I say whine about, but like, I think they're
they whine. Like, they're whiny.
But like, it's largely correct. It's largely correct that like, he is very easy to use to launder some bad idea. And Trump, I think they think that they can do it in this case.
Well, the liberals hate him. The sort of people on the left the quasi-left might make that. The liberals would dislike him more because they would look at like some video where he, used ebonics or said something questioning some sort of element of trans, or whatever. That's their beef with him. But the left will say other things about him that are sort of pretty accurate about him not really being a dedicated, devoted anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. That's fair to say that.
But he's also not a devoted imperialist, which allows a lot of leeway for him to say interesting things. But the fact that the Trump administration is contemplating on it is really funny, because this whole thing started. And, given what we're going to be talking about, I am questioning how this whole thing started. But this whole thing started when, after a campaign trail full of signaling, is not even signaling, overtly stating that the Epstein files were going to be a major concern of the Trump administration.
And they're going to take down the deep state.
They're going to take down the deep state. Cash Patel, Dan Bongino,
They're on
all
the
going to get together.
pedo squad, anti-pedo squad.
Yeah, and after this, Pam Bondi issued a statement definitively saying there's nothing to see here. Insane move. Absolutely insane move. All they had to do was just continue to do nothing, continue to string it out, saying, hey, we're reviewing all this, and next year, by God, you're going to have another binder, and it's going to be a banger. And then when next year rolls around, all I have to do is say, there were some complications, but next year, there's going to be another binder.
Yeah, it did surface at a strange time.
Yeah, exactly. And they never have to do anything. Trump's going to get out of office, or he's going to die of just being massively unhealthy, or whatever. They could have gotten away with it. But instead, the Attorney General Streisanded it. Either they're so stupid that they let this happen, or someone pushed on it. Someone said, "Hey, what's gonna really throw a monkey wrench in the Trump's whole shit if we come out and say there's nothing to see with the Epstein stuff definitively, and then we release this very conspicuously manipulated video that has 1 minute missing."
Yeah.
We're going to release that all publicly, fold our arms, say there's nothing to look at. That seems to go beyond incompetence. I can't imagine a single person who is sympathetic to Trump, wants Trump to succeed, who would say, yes, this is what we should do. People won't pay attention if we say that there's nothing to see here with the Epstein stuff. Oh yeah, no, people will be fine with that. And to be fair, there were, the Charlie Kirks immediately went oh yeah, okay, nothing to see here. But they had to know
yes,
their
sir.
base. Yeah. That they had to know that their base was foaming at the mouth for something.
Right.
And nothing happening would have been better than that something being there's nothing to see here.
Well, but then the question is, so if I can sort of say what I think you might be getting at, or maybe not, and you can chime in if so, this could, because of the fact that Trump did not attack Iran in a really meaningful way, and in fact, it looks like he just did a sort of token strike to which Trump said, hey, we annihilated them, and then Iran is saying, oh boy, these sure set us back. Right, but that Israel knows that it got its ass kicked in that war with Iran, and that the attacks did nothing, and that they are weak and exposed, and that Iran is only going to become a more dangerous, implacable foe. And so this could be a way to put pressure on Trump by Zionist actors. And as crazy as that sounds, because ultimately a full exposure of the Epstein saga would in all likelihood deeply discredit the Zionist project and their methods for achieving greater Israel and their own foreign policies, which include, apparently, the trafficking of underage people to powerful people who would have commit, crimes and rape young underage girls, mostly, as I understand it. Would they do this? Even though it would expose them, would they do this? And I would compare it to look at Oliver's film JFK, where the Israelis were, and I think at a time of crisis, which we'll come back to because of what the Bush administration, H.W. Bush, was trying to do about the settlements and a Palestinian state and so on. So they were promoting a film that raised awareness about a real skeleton in America's closet, which is what Epstein is as well. But in this case, it's the JFK assassination. But that's another instance where there seems to be a big Israeli hand in that also, when you look at James Angleton and the Lansky Syndicate and so on, and Jack Ruby's personage, right? So there is a precedent for thinking that they would be halfway letting their own crimes hang out in order to blackmail the U.S. establishment. So the Epstein thing seems of a piece with the efforts to promote JFK assassination people and so-called conspiracy theories about JFK, because it puts the U.S. the national security state, the empire, under a spotlight that makes it very uncomfortable, and so they're playing chicken with this information in a way.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case. I think that a good working theory is that Israel, there were reports about a fallout between Trump and Netanyahu that were then said by Israelis and Americans to be part of their deception operation in order to lure Iran into a false sense of security. Now, I would be surprised if all of those tensions were fabricated. I would be surprised if there were not constant instances where U.S. officials were feeling undermined, annoyed, and kind of just bothered by Israeli activity, just because it conflicts with what America's actual perceived strategic interests are, just for themselves. And one of those, I think, would be the degree to which America would commit to going full-blown against Iran. I could totally see that there being some
wiping out and the starvation of just the widespread starvation and elimination of the people in Gaza. This is turning out to be
the Trump administration
it's damaging to the U.S. Yes, they don't speak about it in a candid way because they can't, but they do seem to. There do seem to be more people that understand that this is detrimental to the U.S. to see this playing out this way, to the U.S. empire, to U.S. hegemony.
Yes, but I think that both of these things would be a good casus belli for a faction within Israel, or maybe a broader faction within Israel, to start putting the squeeze on Trump vis-a-vis the Epstein files. And one of the things that I saw that was interesting is that in Israel they seem to be thinking the same thing. The Times of Israel a few weeks ago put out a blog post. They have a few writers that they allow to just write things. That's where that Lebensraum article was, by the way.
Yeah.
It was in a Times of Israel blog post where they're openly saying Israel needs its Lebensraum. But this article, it talks about Trump, Israel, and the Epstein files, going on about how all of a sudden, after some issues between Netanyahu, some disagreements between Netanyahu and Trump came. I'll just read it. For a long time, the files had subsided in the background. They weren't considered to be much of a threat to Trump. But all of a sudden, right after he started up with Israel, the files surfaced, and they seemed to be overwhelming him. So this is, basically, he's saying that this is being used by Israel to...
Specifically, when he says right after he started up with Israel, it means the more recent statements which have seemed to sort of chasten Bibi and disagreements over recent Israeli, wartime, war against everybody policies.
Yeah, and so the fact that you have a writer in one of Israel's most prominent English language, ultra pro-Zionist publications, tells you that this working theory is worth considering to be more and more credible.
Yeah, this part's the money part. Now some old files are threatening him. Perhaps Trump will realize that it really doesn't pay to start up with Israel. This is essentially someone saying, how else do you interpret this other than a Zionist saying, yes, the Zionists have these little files that just might happen to come out and embarrass you should you proceed down this path. It's very strange.
Yeah, because maybe you'll find it's in your interest not to fuck with them.
And this is insane. When he says, because when, by divine providence, things that were hidden become revealed, it enables people to correct their mistakes and to endeavor to live their lives properly, the way God wants them to. This is such insane distillation of Zionism. The world is not a jungle. God Almighty runs the world with compassion, giving humanity the ability to fix what's wrong so that we can have peace with true ethics, as God told Moses at Mount Sinai to tell all nations to adhere to the 7 Noah, how you say that, laws. It's just... I have never seen anything... I don't know that I've seen anything like this in U.S. the Western political discourse since the end of World War II. This from a pillar of the Western regime. It is. I know that this guy is not speaking in an official capacity, but the fact that this argument would see the light of day in a major publication in a state supported by the U.S. to the hilt is
a mainstream publication.
Yeah, whatever mainstream means in a Nazified society. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a society where writers and journalists are trained to shut up about these sorts of things. There's overt military censorship in Israel, under threat of imprisonment.
Yeah,
and so they're trained to be more deferential in their opinions and in what they're going to say. This is just basically coming out and saying it's not in a court of law or whatever. It might not pass as direct him directly saying that Israel's threatening Trump, but read only slightly between the lines. That's what he's coming out and saying. And
I mean,
it also
it's
tracks.
truly bizarre.
Yeah, it's weird. So on one hand, you have this guy saying, if Trump splits with Netanyahu, there could be some major consequences. But on the other hand, we just mentioned that there are a lot of people within Israel who are very much against what Netanyahu's doing, or at least the way he's going about doing it. So,
for strategic, as a matter of tactics.
For
the strategy, even for the strategy of the lunatic Greater Israel Lebensraum project.
Right. I don't know if you had this pulled up, but 600, former Israeli military intelligence people, including former heads of the Shin Bet, that's their FBI, former heads of the Mossad, have basically signed a letter urging Trump to cease aid to Netanyahu to prevent him from continuing this maximalist plan that he has. So that's interesting because if we're looking at who they represent, that's probably representative of those cabinet people who had objected to Netanyahu in the instance that we were just talking about. So there is a war, and the stakes are getting higher and higher, and one side's busting out the Epstein files, the other side's, getting together, making public denunciations, unprecedented public denunciations. They might escalate in other ways. One of the ways that I, soft predicted that this conflict could end for Israel is a military coup of some sorts. It might not be show up at the Netanyahu's house with tanks and throw them in a hole or whatever, but it could be like a parliamentary coup that people come together, get the politicians in order, say we're going for a different direction. Netanyahu, it is what it is.
It could be a legalistic lawfare kind of thing, which would really only entail. It wouldn't exactly entail a coup. It would really just entail allowing the legal machinery of Israel to go after crimes that everybody knows Netanyahu has committed. So it's like, do you even call that a coup? Or what do you call it when that machinery is being prevented from operating, which is, basically exceptionism, as in the U.S., and is even more fundamental to the Israeli system. But as to what you were saying about different factions, look at, operating here, even different factions within Israel. I point to this interview that Ari Ben-Menashe, who was a quite slippery and infamous character, if you know the deep political history of the U.S. and its relationship to Mossad, et cetera, et cetera. But this interview that he did on Going Underground, he talked about how, here's the headline: Israel has Trump and U.S. government captive via Epstein blackmail, says ex-Mossad guy. And what's interesting here, they just have, I'm not going to try to play the videos, but you can see them on different YouTube channels and stuff, or just go to RT and watch this one. But here's what he says. He discusses why he believes the U.S. is trapped by Israel to do nothing about the Gaza genocide. He also alleges Epstein was an asset of Israel's Mossad, if you didn't know that already. Epstein's blackmailing of Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton to stop an agreement with Yasser Arafat for a two-state solution, how a number of U.S. presidents have been blackmailed by Israel using Epstein, how Rupert Murdoch's first newspaper was funded for him by Israel, Donald Trump wanting to bring peace to the Middle East but being held back by Israel via blackmail over Epstein, the brainwashing of Israelis during the Gaza genocide, yada, yada. So this is a person who, if you hear what he was saying, he says that he knows from sources that the Epstein network was deployed in order to prevent Barak and Clinton from ultimately recognizing a Palestinian state, along with Israel during this whole process, started by George H.W. Bush. So here you have this is where the danger lies for them in trying to use the Epstein network this way, is that, as I say, it also deeply implicates Israel in terrible, terrible practices. So this, to my mind, it shows how desperate they are, because these are not things they want in the light of day. They're not as useful for blackmail in that way, in my opinion.
Well, one thing you can look at if you're interested in Ari Ben-Menashe is the Ghost Stories for the End of the World, Matt's podcast, where he has this, I think it's 13-part series on the Promise software scandal. I think you had
on Octopus and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Octopus. And
I kind of disagree with him on some aspects of this, because I feel like he sort of posits George H.W. Bush as the key villain, And I have now come to think that it was something even worse than him, the neocons, and that was behind the Promise scandal and the fact that people were feeding all that information to Cossolaro. But he still does good research. It's a very interesting series.
Yeah, and Menashe seemed to be one of those characters who was dropping little knowledge nuggets for whatever reason. Why a former Mossad agent is trying to help along an investigation to the heart of the American deep political system. Well, I think the Gray Alliance thesis is the most plausible explanation, unless you think this guy is like a person of conscience who after years of Mossad was like, oh.
I mean, it is so interesting that he's the one saying this stuff so now.
Bad.
Yeah, it's fascinating that he's the one putting this stuff out there now, because this is not in agreement with the sort of neocon syndicate style deep state.
Yeah. So we'll see what comes of this, or what more things come out. Because if he's making this clear, and if people in the Times of Israel seem to be making this clear, maybe they're trying to get their message across to a wider group of people, or make sure that the U.S. administration is very well aware of the decisions that they have in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's potentially weakening the people that would be looking to use Epstein to sexually, to blackmail Trump and the U.S. regime into supporting the genocide to the hilt. I mean, that's one way to interpret it. So they're trying to use Epstein even now to pursue this insane project. And this person is potentially acting as a way to defang that as a useful part of this whole project. And I wrote about I wrote this back in February, but what he's talking about with these Clinton era peace talks being derailed by blackmail and other issues jives with much of what I've been thinking, especially in recent years, that this is all part of this big, deep political scandal in the U.S. So I wrote about this Lewinsky, a mega scandal, the Zionist neocon syndicate as a deep political formation of the U.S. empire, and was pointing out how bizarre it was that you had a painting of Bill Clinton in a blue dress in Epstein's apartment. Like, it's such a strange flex, but then this is part of how they blackmailed Bill Clinton. I mean, they were eavesdropping on those conversations. Mossad was. This came out later in a book. They had all sorts of who knows what else about phone sex with Clinton and Lewinsky. So anyway, this is people should check out the American Exception Substack if they want to find this article. But this is a key part of what I think we've been living through for the last few decades, which is the last guy to really try to confront Israel on behalf of the U.S., the last administration, was H.W. Bush, who I obviously am no fan of. But there's a good article here from over at Middle East Eye, which is kind of a hit or miss publication, I think. But this article is very interesting. And it's a new book chronicling the life of former Secretary of State, shows how U.S. pressure on Israel has brought positive change in the past. And it's James Baker, who, again, super establishment, connected to Texas oil interests and American corporate power, very corporate dude. It's not someone who is opposed to U.S. imperialism. But it says, the 2 decades passed since the Israeli leaders sat down with the Palestinians in Madrid. This is the Madrid peace process. It's easy to forget that the concept of a two-state solution, which today seems kind of, outmoded or whatever, was not, it's easy to forget that it was part of the international agenda and U.S. policy at the time. At the 91 conference, Palestinians were willing to accept some form of limited self-rule in the West Bank and Gaza, and even agreed to placate Israel by coming to the conference as part of a Jordanian delegation. And the guy that led the main architect of this was James Baker, U.S. Secretary of State. And the book about it is The Man Who Ran Washington. So I think that's worth looking at. But rather than go into the details of this article, I just want to point out something that was said by James Baker at the time, who, again, I'm not making any case for these guys being great humanist, democratic statesmen who wanted, an international more lawful utopian order. But I think they did perhaps want a more lawful order because they saw it was in the U.S. interests. But anyway, this is a quote from the article by Thomas Friedman, but the quote is from Baker himself. He said, this is from a U.S. Secretary of State, and it gets right at the heart of the matter. And for people that would say that, oh, it's all the U.S. policy and it's all one policy and it's all just part of the U.S. empire strategy, and they all agree with it, so they all use Israel as their aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and they're all behind the Greater Israel Project, yada, yada. Here's what Baker said. For Israel, now is the time to lay aside once and for all the unrealistic version of a Greater Israel. And then he says, for Palestinians, now is the time to speak with one voice for peace. So, he's doing the two-state solution thing. But the bigger point is, he's getting right at the heart of the matter for saying, lay aside once and for all the unrealistic vision of Greater Israel. Well, as we know now, and as we can see more in retrospect, this has been the lodestar for Zionists. This is Greater Israel. It's why Israel never declared its borders. It's why they launched the '67 war. It is the thing that they are obsessed with. So this, to me, is, I think, even more relevant. Oh, another important aspect of this, which actually I will go back to this article for a second because there's a part of it that's so funny. Netanyahu banished. Baker was brutal with Benjamin Netanyahu in a way that the Clinton and Obama administrations never dared to be. Netanyahu, deputy foreign minister at the time, infuriated Baker by claiming the U.S. was being gullible with the Palestinians. And so an angry Baker instructed his officials that Netanyahu would be barred from entering the State Department. When Dennis Ross, a Baker aide, and by the way, really a Zionist plant, so when he pleaded this was too harsh a punishment, Baker would just smile and say nope. He eventually relented and allowed Netanyahu to come in and see junior officials, but refused to meet with him personally throughout his time in office. So this is, I'd been talking about how H.W. Bush represented a break or something different in U.S. policy and sort of the last gasp of like the way Eisenhower and even Kennedy tried to restrain Israel. But it's even, I just find more and more evidence for this, and more evidence of an Israeli hand behind all these scandals that beset George H.W. Bush, which was like Iran-Contra, BCCI, Casallero's octopus reporting is weird, the Franklin scandal breaking and becoming a story, even having a Discovery Channel documentary on it, Stone's JFK.
It's worth going into that Franklin connection because it's very interesting. It was the Washington Times, was it?
Yeah, they broke a major part of it.
Was the only paper in the entire country who took the story with any degree of seriousness.
And connected it to the White House, especially.
Yeah, and Nick Bryant, when he was writing the book, The Franklin Scandal, it would always come up that, the Washington Times is like the only place covering this, the Washington Times. Well, why is that? Why did the Washington Times become one of the only papers to take it seriously?
Yeah, and why did a super Zionist small publishing house connected to figures like Richard Pearl and other people that he's worked with in the past, which I discovered on looking into it more, why did they publish a book by Pete Bruton called George Bush, the Mafia, and the CIA, something to that effect, right? And it's all about how mobbed up Bush is and the CIA is involved in all of these crimes and so on. And it's an interesting, important book, but look at who is publishing it and when it is published and the effect of it. This is where I do disagree with Matt on ghost stories. I mean, I get he's a podcaster doing podcast stuff, but this is where I think we are really in the dark about the deep political history of the United States and some of these scandals, not as the exposure of scandals, but really to the extent that we understand many of these things about Watergate and the JFK assassination and the so-called octopus and all that, and the BCCI scandal, is because exposing these scandals has been a tool of kind of blackmail statecraft for these different factions. And so it's one issue, perhaps the key one, that these Zionist actors have been obsessed with is Greater Israel. And we now see that people in the U.S. establishment who are really dedicated imperialists recognized that this was an albatross around the U.S. and it would be disastrous if they kept pursuing it. And so they did it. But Bush and Baker were defeated in '92 with the help of Perot his candidacy, and then Perot's son, decades later, gets this really nice, lucrative oil concession to basically steal Iraqi oil and then sell it to Israel and Turkey. It's amazing how much I keep finding confirmation of all this.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very anxious for this to be synthesized into one place, because it does explain, and that's part of the reason that that I'm sympathetic to Matt for including HW as like the tip of the spear, is because this perspective of interstate or like inter-party conflict isn't really well understood or explored in the available literature. To the extent that they have been talked about, the details are pretty muddy. You had was it Oglesby and there were a few others who write in that vein.
Yeah,
But
really,
it's not-
Peter is head and shoulders above them all. But the
Yeah.
ironic thing is he wouldn't go deep into the Israeli side of it. So
yeah,
like he
but I'm
omitted,
sympathetic
he
to
came
that.
to omit that over the years, which I only discovered after doing the oral history with him and going back and looking at a lot of his work and thinking about it again, especially in the light of the Gaza genocide. And it's been astounding to me. It's
Yeah.
just been kind of earth shaking for me, and I'm trying to explain it, but I don't know if it's over the heads of some of the conspiracy posse or what, but it's really mind blowing.
Yeah. And I think writing it down and putting it all out there, like you mentioned that you had a presentation at, it wasn't COPPA, but it was.
No, it was a small salon with a bunch of JFK people, including Peter Del Scott, Jim D'Eugenio, John Newman, Tink Thompson, Gary Aguilar, Bill
Yeah,
Simpich.
and you presented this, and you presented at least a version of
Yeah.
of the Gray Alliance thesis. It was the one that you published on Substack, right? That's what you read there.
I published it later, a version of it later on Substack, but the original recording was lost,
Well, yeah,
unfortunately. But I gave a sort of bigger, deeper one, a longer one, a version of the same one that people can find. It's on the YouTube channel too.
yeah, and like the response from people was it was pretty encouraging. But you mentioned that Peter definitely didn't dispute any of it. he
No.
didn't. He didn't come.
He
out
had
and say,
some
"No,
good
no, this is
contributions
not
to the
correct."
discussion after the fact too. We talked about Angleton and why Angleton was able to do this, and he pointed out that his job is to sort of spy on spies, and so he's given an enormous amount of leeway to do things that he wanted to do.
Now, you said a while ago that some people study politics to understand the JFK assassination, whereas other people study the assassination to understand politics. Like that's how they. It's one window into understanding how the world works. For those former people, I could easily see how something like the Gray Alliance thesis, it might just come off as unimportant, kind of like it's not as. It's learning,
Or it
more
doesn't
about
conform
the
to their
deep
existing
network.
theories. It's a radical revision to the prevailing range of theories that people have on things like the JFK assassination.
Well, to someone who doesn't really have a theoretical understanding of like the deep political establishment, they hear rich person doing shady stuff connected with shady people.
And connected to Israel, aka
Yeah.
the Jewish state.
Yeah, well, but even that, I mean, I think for some people it just might be one more, I guess, distant figure, distant cloaked, shadowy
Episode.
figure. Yeah, like and that Israel or the banks or the oil, finance. It's all just one big thing, just one big evil people at the top. But understanding this factional warfare, understanding that this is an oligarchic plurality where a faction can take a hold of the elements of the public state, elements of the national security state to achieve their own ends against other people who are also vying for those same levers of control. That thesis, if you're interested in understanding politics, it's very important. If you're interested in understanding the Kennedy assassination in any deep way, it's essential. But if you're just trying to figure out, was there a conspiracy? Yeah. And some shadowy guys lied about it? Yeah. Well, and then you just go and look at some of the names and figures and say, yeah, look, they're part of the political system. So the regime killed JFK. But why? In which part? those are those questions that I think your analysis answers in a little bit more depth, and so
Right.
that's why people aren't really used to it.
And I think that one thing that kind of obscured this for me was the fact that Peter, who was really the only person to write very seriously about these things, I realized, like Carl Oglesby was really taking a stab at something, but he was kind of out of his depth. I realized when I go back and look at this, because he's looking at a lot of the same things and trying to make the case. But Peter, on the other hand, became someone who did not pursue his research to its ends, and he went from an unpublished manuscript that was supposed to be published and basically got 86 by the publisher, as I understand it. He wrote more about the Lansky Zionist connections to the JFK assassination, but he says in a handwritten part of one of these manuscripts, which I assume that he meant to add it or change it later, says, if Mossad did indeed play a key instrumental role in the JFK assassination, they would not have done so without the approval of a higher authority in the U.S., because to have done so would have been suicidal for the Zionist project at that time. And I do also believe that it is that. So you have to look at these militarist factions or corruptible factions in the U.S. oligarchy to understand it as well. But it's a similar thing with Epstein in that there's an enormous blackmail potential. So many politicians are forced to go along. Well, back in the time of the JFK assassination, the National Crime Syndicate was making so many people rich and was so intertwined with the U.S. national security state policies, especially CIA operations overseas. They were also protected by the FBI and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And if that had been exposed, then people, even if they were against it, they could have said, well, this will destroy our position in the Cold War. We'll lose all legitimacy, because to investigate the Kennedy assassination leads to Jack Ruby and his role in the syndicate and the syndicate's protection, by the major organs of the U.S. national security state. This cannot be allowed to ever see the light of day. And so this is where the blackmail aspect of it is so much more than just getting a guy on tape. It's the whole project of global dominance that the U.S. pursued and created a clandestine state to pursue that ended up being allied with an international crime syndicate. That is blackmail that you can't even put into words properly. The power and the magnitude of what we're just calling it blackmail does not do it justice. It's almost like a mutually assured destruction for these different oligarchs who benefit from the empire.
Right. It brings to mind this interesting loop that doing these high crimes, like it was an episode of Better Call Saul, where one of Saul is like talking to a guy and says, "Oh, you want to be enlisted in this crime I'm going to commit?" And then he's like, "Yeah." And then they do a crime, and then Saul goes back. He's like, "Okay, well, I own you now. Like, if you ever want to disobey me or go wherever, then like I can expose your involvement in this crime." It's the same way with like these intelligence agencies and these intelligence networks, where they can do a crime and, let's say kill the president, and not only is the crime have like long-lasting effects, the fact that you did the crime and you probably did so with the sanction or support of other elements within that system then gives you the power to potentially expose that crime at a later date. And depending on who you are and how insulated from the effects you are, that can be a very viable political tactic to achieve some sort of end. I mean, like that's what it's like a larger scale version of what happened in Watergate, right?
Exactly. And the H.W. Bush Watergate sequel.
Yeah. Like, the break-in was one thing, but well, who were these people who broke in? And they had all this evidence. They took pictures. They were smiling. They left a trace. They wrecked I can't remember the name.
Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office, Fielding, Dr. Fielding, and they bungled the Watergate burglary and seemed to want to be arrested. And then from jail, James McCord is basically saying that I'm not going to let the president blame this. on the CIA and fire Richard Helms. But Helms is the key person who, after they fired Dulles, keeps all this stuff under wraps. When Watergate began, that was one of the things that alarmed Helms, was that the burglars were clearly connected to Mexican banking interests that were intertwined with drug traffic, which I have to believe connects to Harold Meltzer and the Lansky Syndicate and their relationship with the CIA. And so they've got them. Whether how much of a dedicated Zionist Helms was, who knows? But he was part of that project. He's the one who gave Angleton the ability to do all these things and protected him even after Dulles was gone, because he was the deputy director of plans, which was put him in charge of covert operations. So this is a huge part of the story. It's blackmail over and over again, because the crimes are so huge. But the halo the U.S. constructs for itself is essential. And so you can't destroy the halo, meaning you can't really investigate the high crimes of these people.
Yeah, no, exactly. And now it's coming, and now we're watching it in real time.
We're watching it collapse.
Yeah.
Because the bad guys win over and over and over again. And so they pursue an insane, evil policy of global domination, literally, and they write papers about it and everything else. And it fails, as all empires fail, because they were lunatics. And there was hubris and greed that motivated them to do it. And now it's all collapsing, and they're freaking out. You've got the Epstein, Trump running on exposing Epstein, but Trump is backed by the same people, same types like Adelson and so on, who's an heir to the sort of Lansky syndicate. I mean, literally, the Adelsons run the Sands Casino, which was a Lansky joint originally. That's where all those billions of dollars come from that they get through gambling and who knows what else over in Macau. And so it's the hubris of this, the criminals being like, we're going to expose some of our crimes if you don't do what we want. It's now coming to a head. And on some level, one almost feels a little sorry for Trump, but not really in the bigger picture. I mean, he's a product of this system. His psychology is a product of a terrible system, and he never should have been president. It's a sick system. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, you can't get worse than that in some ways, but I have a feeling that he did not understand all of these things, because no one really does. They have their own relationship to power, and their own fame and wealth it bedazzles them in different ways. There's no way you can understand this stuff, which almost no social scientists really grasp.
And he's not particularly intelligent in general. In general, people around him, most teachers have been like, yeah, well, he's not very curious, not very smart. And you hear him talk, he's obviously not very smart. If he's being manipulated by global forces, there is every chance that he has no clue what he's up against. Maybe in the vaguest of terms, but he's just a guy used to using his money to get what he wants.
And dealing with other people doing the same thing.
Yeah, and dealing with other people doing the same thing. And a guy like that, that's who you can work with. That's who you want in the White House.
Especially if you have sexual blackmail on him and or his close associates.
All the better. And
yeah.
Yeah.
It's all falling apart. And now we're he's talking about sending nuclear submarines to threaten. I mean, are we really going to be killed over this? Are we all going to die because of this idiocy? Yeah. This is what the whole world is watching. And I think if we emerge from this, they will look back on this as the strangest long-running slapstick tragedy in human history. I think the U.S. empire is.
Oh yeah, no, I think there's a nice mini series to be made in 100 years of the speed run of American decline.
Yeah,
and it's just these last 2-3 years.
I mean, you could go back longer. You could do a mini series. You could have the Operation Underworld. There's so many places you could start from. Who knows where? But it's such madness. But I think we've gone on long enough. Bryce, you're still doing work at the Substack?
Yes, still doing work at the Substack, slowly but steadily. Hopefully more stuff will be coming soon. I'm making a note to just look into who exactly ordered the drafting of this Epstein memo and why or what explanation they give. Did it come directly from Trump, or was someone like, hey, Pam?
I think it was unsigned, right? Wasn't that the story that nobody would sign their name to it?
Huh? I don't.
I seem to recall that detail.
I don't remember which specific statement that they had that was unsigned, but it might have been that one. But that's just it's just so bizarre. So maybe I'll look into that a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can follow me there. Always follow me on Twitter. I do be tweeting, and Aaron, you also be tweeting, so
I do too much. It's such a waste of time that I can't stop myself.
I
Hopefully, some
don't
people
think it's
find
a
them
waste of
useful. So
time.
it's cool.
I do think that it's like a useful thing. Like, however bad Twitter has gotten, I still think it's a useful source of information if you know how to use it properly. And plus, you can always, if you're confused about something, ask Grok if it's true.
Oh God, yeah, that's reliable. Okay. Well, with that said, until next time, Bryce. Thanks a lot. It was great to be with you again.
Until next time.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I want to express my deepest appreciation to all of our American Exception subscribers. If you are not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Thank you for tuning in and helping us bring light to the devil's chessboard.